Hi, folks. Steven here. So, as you can see, I'm up here with Anne from Pikapi Podcast. This is another one of our live streams. Our topic du jour, I guess, is today we're going to be talking about the music of Pokemon Picross for the 3DS. Yes, there is another Pokemon Picross that almost got released, but not quite. But we're talking about the one that actually came out back at the end of 2015. Additionally, there'll be a fair number of amount of feedback to go through, and we'll also be doing a game discussion. Although Anne has let me know this will be a little bit interesting because, not only did she not really get a chance to play this game, she doesn't really like the Picross or nonogram format. Not sure precisely what
Yeah,
it is,
I
but we'll
didn't just not happen upon this game. Like, I actively chose not to play it. But never fear, I am prepared for this discussion.
Yeah, so not for everyone, I guess. I don't know if there are any other Pokemon games we'll be talking about in the future that'll be like that. But we usually do a pre-show here. We will get to our discussion of the actual music in a little bit. But those of you who have been following the channel for a while know that I have been in the AI realm for a number of things. One of the newest things on there, I've shown in previous pre-shows, we've done things like we had a guessing game where Anne and I tried to guess when I had made a model combining our voices, who said what and what we were talking about in various episodes. We also did some transformations of various things to make them look like what would other characters from the franchise look like in a Detective Pikachu type movie, or what would other Pokemon movies look like if they got a CGI remake like the Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. I think at this point it's pretty unlikely that we'll see that, although we don't really know what we're doing for another movie next at all, and it's been a long time. But this time around, what we're doing, there's some new music generation things out there. And so what I did, you may know, I'm sure most of you know anyway. Let me rephrase that. So, as I'm sure a lot of you know, there are things called character songs in anime and video games and some other places as well. And what these usually are, they're a song usually from the perspective of the character or about a specific character. And, there's one for pretty much the main character of every anime, including Pokemon. Ostensibly, the season theme is always usually about the main character of that show. Whether that's Ash or, I'm forgetting the Horizons protagonist, unfortunately.
Rico or Liko?
Yeah, I think so. So, sorry about that, but I need to catch up on that, especially since they just released the second set of episodes. But there are a lot of characters who don't get character songs. So I decided, since AI is a thing now, I would use one of the AI music services to sort of attempt to create character songs for some characters that don't have them. I did purposely avoid some of the main anime characters or game characters that have them, which also kind of disqualifies some of the characters in the movies and whatnot. I tried to avoid those. But what I've done is I've created, these are relatively short snippets, they're only about 30 seconds. You can make them longer, but for the purposes of this quiz that I'm giving Anne, there's I heard a little click there or something of that nature. But in any case, there's a... Sorry, where was I about to go with that? But these are little snippets. They each apply to a human character, for the most part, except for maybe the fifth one. Well, the fifth one is going to be pretty much impossible to guess. I put it in there sort of as a joke, and I'll explain it once we get there. But, Anne, you can certainly try. The first four, though, are all based on human characters from some aspect of the franchise. And we'll be going through each of these. I can replay these if you need me to. But why don't you go ahead and
I have a question before we get started.
Sure.
Did you generate these based off of existing music, or did you generate them off like a prompt of like you described the character?
So what I usually did is I described a musical style that I wanted to use, and I gave some general characteristics related to this type of song I wanted to generate. Usually these are something about the character, or where they are from, or something like that. So these are original compositions. I usually pretty much always went and edited the lyrics and reworked it a few times until I got what I wanted.
It comes with lyrics. Okay. So
Yeah,
this is basically apples to apples, like I have to guess how you perceive the character a little bit.
Yeah,
And ha-
yeah, that's
okay,
kind of the
okay.
gist of it there. So we're gonna go ahead and try that. Like I said, there's 5 songs, um, and I'll go into sort of a little bit of production details after each one. I can replay these if you need me to, Anne, but we did test out some of the volumes with some other music off of this device, so hopefully this all works out correctly in terms of volume. Well, let me know if I need to do this again at a different volume, but okay, here's the first one. I think it should be pretty appropriate for the format we're using here.
Welcome here to the show. Let's see just what you know. Ready, go!
On this isle, the magma flows.
Answer right or trade some blows. Beat the heat.
Stay on your toes.
It's quiz time. Now here we go.
All right, so like I said, these are about 30 seconds. I can certainly make them longer, but for the purposes of doing a quiz, I didn't want people to go through, 3 or 4 minutes of music, and it would take me a lot longer. But Anne, any guesses which character from the franchise that is in relation to?
Would this be Blaine, the gym leader of Cinnabar Island?
Which is Blaine, yes, that is correct. So yes, the quiz show one there. So yeah, so for this one, the prompt I gave to, I made all these, by the way, using Udio. They want you to make sure you use their name there when you say where you get these from. So just, yes, udio.com. There's a couple others out there. I think 11 Labs is coming out with one they've sort of demoed a little bit already. And but what I gave it the prompt was a 1960s game show theme with about a game show that is a quiz show hosted from a volcanic island was the original prompt I gave it. And I got a couple ones based on that. And then I took the one I liked better and I reworked the words. I worked in the word. It originally said lava flows. I wanted to be magma just because that's more of a Pokemon word with Magmar and I guess Team Magma, although we're not really referencing that. And it gave me a couple more variations, and I ended up actually smushing a couple of them together to create this. That part at the very end is actually supposed to be, I guess, Blaine himself. That was the one that sounded the most like him, where he's like coming like from off stage or behind the through the audience and stuff like that, like a game show host sometimes does. You can picture him like holding like a stack of question cards or something like that. And doing that there. The crowd noise is actually something I produced using like MIDI a ways back. You might actually recognize it from some version of the PIRN Top 25 Countdown audio. I think I used that as a crowd noise there at some point. So that's where that's from. It's actually probably a larger crowd than you would see in the gym there. Maybe it's being piped in, which would lead to a very confused challenger, I suppose. Like, where is everybody? Also, knowing what happens to Cinnabar Island in between Gens 1 and 2, I can't imagine that show stayed on the air very long. But, sorry. Apologies to anyone who has been, knows someone who's been hit by a lava flow. In any case. But, yeah, so that's that one there. So it took a few iterations, and I combined things a little bit to get what I wanted there. But I'm fairly happy with that, at least as a, sort of a proof of concept. All right, let's go on to song number 2.
Dig down deep, yeah, we know what we're doing. Got a drill burr humming. Through the dirt it's grooving. Searching for that gold. That's a cold hard truth. Here in Driftvale City, yeah, we'll find our proof. Come on, Lacey, find that proof. We'll break the earth wide open, let the steel go deep.
All right, so who do you think that is?
I forget his name, but the gym leader at Driftvale City, who's dressed like a cowboy and tells off Team, what's their face?
Plasma.
And tells them off like, I'm not a real learning man, and you're using a lot of fancy words, but it sounds like you're trying to make people do what they don't want them to do. That guy?
Yeah, so yeah, his name is actually Clay. You have the right person, just couldn't come up with a name there. So that is supposed to be Clay. So yes, for this one I prompted, as you might have guessed, a country western song with a male vocalist talking about drilling into the earth. It actually gave me one of the ones it gave me was Drill Bit Serenade, was sort of the title it gave me. In case you're wondering, the Blaine's Gym one was originally called Island of Enigma or something like that was the title it gave to the one I ended up using. But that was pretty easy to change to Drillbur. Pretty much all the explicit Pokemon references you're going to hear in here are ones that I had to edit the lyrics a little bit here and there. I also changed added the name of the city in there. And then Lacey, I don't know if you know the significance of that name.
Lacey?
Yeah. No, that is Clay's daughter, who we just found out about late last year in the second set of DLC for Scarlet and Violet. She shows up at the Blueberry Academy for...
Right on.
Yeah. So I guess a little fifth generation, besides the music stuff they do there, but the things that they brought in with that one. So that was a very interesting thing there. That is a pretty much a straight thing. I really like the part at the end there, we'll break the earth wide open, or how that goes. This one is one I might consider expanding at some point. Yeah. Any other thoughts on that one you want to give? I haven't given you a chance to comment too much on these.
That was fun.
All right. Well, here's song number 3.
Rolling through the avenues, the city sings my name. Skate past shops that shimmer, chasing neon flames. I know you're feeling it, 'cause we're chasing our dream. Punch it, punch it, punch it. You know we're rolling in style. Kick it, kick it, kick it.
Okay.
The girl from X and Y who trains the Lucario. Is it X and Y?
It is X. You have the correct game. You have the correct person.
And oh gosh, what is her name?
No, they're not. They're not rollerblades. They're regular roller skates.
Okay, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That's okay. But do you have any idea what her name is?
No, gosh, it's gonna come to me in the middle of the night.
Okay, I don't know if I'm saying it correctly because I'd have to double check like the anime. I think she actually shows up again in Journeys. Ash does a rematch with her. Corinna or Karina.
Yeah, okay, yeah.
I forget exactly which is the correct name to use in there.
Probably depends.
But
on
yes,
what language
that is her. So for this one, the prompt I gave initially was a Euro dance song with a female vocalist singing about how the things she sees as she roller skates through town. And then I changed a few things. Originally, it gave me like Paris, 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 Venice, Venice, Venice. So I changed that to punch it and kick it to get the fighting theme in there a little bit. Didn't make too many other changes in that one. But, yeah, so that one, fairly straightforward. Actually, I think that might have been the first one I tried making with this.
Please, I just watched Eurovision, so please contact the good people of San Marino and enter this for next year.
I like I said, a lot of these could certainly be polished into a finished product. Certainly, I mean, it doesn't give you like MIDI stuff or notation or anything if you wanted to play this live or stuff like that. I'm assuming that'll come down the road. But for ideating like this, it's pretty good. All right, so this one, I'll give you a hint here. This is not sung by the person it is about. It is someone singing about someone else. And your goal is to figure out who that other person is. Sorry, I'll explain why we ended up there in a little bit.
They're singing about somebody else. I'm guessing
right.
The subject, not the singer. Okay.
Yes.
Okay.
He wanders through the twilight mist in search of beast in legend told, where Ho-Oath lies and unknown glide, their secrets held in myths of old. He is a seeker brave and true, for mysteries he yearns to find.
All right. Thoughts on who is being described by this song?
I mean, it honestly could be a lot of people. But when it said seeker, I think you're looking for someone specific, and it is not hitting me. I mean, I'm just gonna go with Silver, the guy who met Richie and fought a Moltres.
No, but it is
Yeah.
a character from Gen 2. That's one reason you may have noticed it uses the word Ho-Oh and
Yeah.
unknown. So this is definitely a Gen 2 character. Does that narrow it down a little bit?
I mean, no. Like, I've got a vague idea, but, like, nothing I could, like, actually put a name or a movie or anything to. So, yeah, you'll have to tell me.
Oh, all right. This is, admittedly, of the four that you could reasonably guess, this is probably the hardest. This is Yucine. This is a character
the guy looking for a sweet okay.
Yes. So this is the guy who was introduced in Crystal, and he shows up in a couple other places. Shows up in the anime, shows up in, I think, at least one of the mini-series that they've done online for Pokemon. So you would recognize him there. So basically, for the prompt here, I asked for a musical number, shows up a musical number by a male singer who is talking about looking for mysterious, legendary creatures. And for some reason, it gave me a female singer. This is apparently a problem with some of these services, is that whatever training data they're based on is skewed by genre, and you don't always get what you want, or sometimes it just ignores it, or whatever, because it's prioritizing other things. So rather than try and keep regenerating the same thing to get a male vocalist, I felt it was probably better just to change the pronouns while I was changing some of the other stuff. So I added in, originally it said like dragons fly and griffins glide. And I changed that to, Ho-Oh flies and unknown glide. Just to bring that in a little bit. Those relatively small edits, actually. So that was kind of the result I got there. Okay, we got one more. Like I said, your chance of getting this is basically 0, but I had a funny thing I wanted to tack in. I picked this for a specific reason, so let's go ahead and listen to this one. All right, apologies to the folks at home. And do you want to guess what this is? I don't think you would have been exposed to the thing that this is a very niche call out to, but why don't you go ahead and give it a try?
I was going to guess your OC, who is in the fire team at Scarlet and Violet's riding atop of the van.
Well, no, but let me go ahead and...
That was my guess.
I would have accepted a possible guess of Roxy from Black and White too, but it's not her either.
She deserves a song.
She kind of has one in there, actually. Yeah. Or there's a little bit of vocalization in there, and of course she shows up in the anime.
More.
And she's in Masters. But no, this is not about Roxy. This is back in the early 2000s. There were a number of bumpers produced for Kids WB. For various shows, sometimes crossing over shows, sometimes announcing things. And one of the things they put out was sort of a fake album ad for an artist called Jigglypuff Daddy. Setting aside the person that's named after and their legal troubles right now, where they made up a bunch of track names for a fake Jigglypuff album. Some of them were more obvious, like Puff Up the Volume instead of Pump Up the Volume, and I forget what all was on there. But one of the choices I definitely remember, unfortunately I couldn't find this video on YouTube when I tried to look for it, but was theme from Puffy the Vaporeon Slayer. So I looked up the Buffy the Vampire Slayer Season 1 theme and got the instrumentation and told the AI to make a song that was... basically a guitar and drum-driven 90s theme song for a TV show where young adults battle aquatic creatures. And that was one of the things I got. So yes, if by some miracle you got that. Now that I have a feeling that that little bumper that was probably worked on by the guy I interviewed a number of years ago, who did a lot of the bumpers for Kids WB back in the day. Just a guess on my part, but I did interview the guy who did at least some of that work on some of those things there. But and before we go on to our main discussion here, any thoughts on the sort of experiment as a whole? I think this might be one we come back to at some point.
That was fun.
Yeah. What do you think of the quality of the music? Obviously, you're not listening to it directly, but hopefully it carried through fairly well onto the stream.
Yeah, I didn't have any problems hearing it. The audience can tell us their experience.
Yeah, so like I said, just wanted to sort of toss that out there as something kind of new there. There are a couple. I used Udio for mine. So that was kind of my choice of tools there. Based on what I'd heard, one of the other major ones is called Suno. It's Suno, is another big one that I haven't used. And 11 Labs is coming out with one as well. They're a fairly well-known AI company, and some of the other places will be soon to follow, I'm sure. Like a lot of AI generative stuff, there's some definite controversy going on with some of these tools there. So we'll see what happens in the future, but I thought this was a very interesting use. All right, but now it is time to get started with our... Well, let me turn down that channel there so it's not interfering with anything. Our actual discussion here today, which is supposed to be the music of Pokemon Picross for the 3DS, the one that actually came out. And are you just about ready? Are you ready and going there, or?
Yeah, I'm ready.
All right, I'll start the recordings here. All right, so leave a little pause and I'll do an introduction here. Otherwise, it should be pretty similar to our other types of discussions if you've seen those before. If I can just move to punch up my notes here. There we go. Hi, I'm Stephen Reich here at the Pokepress Studios in Madison, Wisconsin. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast, and we're continuing our series of Pokemon side game music discussions. We're working through the X and Y generation right now, Generation 6, and we've reached Pokemon Picross for the 3DS. Not to be confused with an apparent canceled Picross game that was supposed to be released back in Gen 1. This is the one that actually came out. It's a free-to-start game that you could get up until, about a year ago when the eShop for the 3DS and Wii U closed. So, unfortunately, you're out of luck if you don't have a system that has it on there. But let's see, as far as when this was released, this was released back in December of 2015, just a few days apart by region. Japan was on the 2nd, North America and Europe was on the 3rd, and Australia was on the 4th. Now, Anne, we talked about this a little bit before we started recording this, but Picross, or nonograms, I think is another name for them out there. They're not something you're terribly interested in just as a puzzle format. Do you want to kind of describe what your aversion is? Do you just, not enjoy them, or?
Yeah, I just don't know what it is. I love lots of different kinds of logic puzzles, like specifically like the logic, like figuring out who sat where and ordered what dish. I like Sudoku. I like a lot of different types of cryptograms and puzzles. But for some reason, like nonograms, that's always the one I skip over in every single puzzle book. And yeah, it just doesn't do it for me. For some reason, I just don't enjoy them that much. And yeah, I can't explain it.
All right. Well, I do appreciate you doing this. Now, of course, you did do some study, even though you've never played this game.
Yeah.
You never actually downloaded the thing when you had the chance, and I think the folks at home will understand why based on what you said there. Because this was actually a free download, although you would eventually, if you wanted to unlock everything right away, you would have to pay for it. So as far as my experience with the puzzle type itself, I had heard about it at least as far back as like Mario's Picross on the Game Boy, which you could get on the original 3DS Virtual Console. And if you have Nintendo Switch Online, the Super Nintendo has a Mario Picross game that was only released in Japan, but you can play it fairly well without having to know any Japanese, as long as you know the basic rules of what Picross/nonograms are. We'll talk more about the actual mechanics in our game discussion, but I did pick this up when it originally released, and it was freemium, so it gave you a certain number of Picross, or I forget exactly what the in-game currency was, but basically you had a certain number of cells you could mark out, and before you had to wait for it to recharge at like 1 a minute, unless you decided to buy it out. So I played it, just using at the free level for a while, and I actually ended up buying it outright. So I did enjoy this, and I played through pretty much the whole main campaign and have almost all the puzzles solved. So that's sort of my history with this, and I still play other ones. We'll talk about some of the other games that these folks made. This game was made by Jupiter Multimedia, or Jupiter Corp. I think Jupiter Multimedia might actually be something else. So this was made by Jupiter, and if that name sounds familiar, that's of course because they worked on, let's see, Pokemon Pinball, Pinball Ruby Sapphire. I think they also had a small part to play in the Game Boy Camera, which was a Creatures Game Freak production as well, and had some Pokemon stuff in it. And in fact, they're still around. They've published at least I don't know how many, probably at least half a dozen Picross titles that Anne will never play for the Nintendo Switch. So if you need more Picross, you got some options there. Nothing thematic that I'm aware of. I don't even think they've done any other Nintendo properties since that Mario's Picross game, or that stuff back in the 90s or whatever. So I don't think there's too much there, but definitely more Picross contact if you like this and want to get back into it. Of course, we're here to talk about the music, and the music was done by
Yuka Tsujiyoko.
Yuka Sugiyoko. Hopefully I got that about right. But this person is, she's actually quite prolific in another Nintendo series, which is Fire Emblem. She has a ton of credits in that series going back to the 90s at least. Also has worked a little bit on Paper Mario. Also worked on some of the dedicated Super Scope games for the Super Nintendo. So I have a little bit of knowledge of those. Anne, what did you dig up on her?
Yeah, well, she mentored under Hirokazu Tanaka, which now we know how she got into the Pokemon world. And it's really interesting how she got into Fire Emblem, because it seems like she took charge of the franchise because at the time she was the only music composer they had. She was basically a programmer with a little bit of a music background. And she kind of was just thrown right into the fire with that, suddenly taking on 26 songs for an RPG. Again, she was mentored by some very professional people, and really seems to have become the name for that franchise, the music of it, at least, and is very, very well known in that one franchise, but made a lot with a bit of experience.
Yeah, it wasn't uncommon in the 8 and 16-bit era for musicians, people making the music for video games also have to have a fair bit of programming knowledge. I believe Junichi Masuda, who did the music for the much of the early Pokemon games, and I forget his exact job title now, where he's actually moved to, but you'll notice, if you look at the credits of the original Pokemon games, he's also listed as a programmer, so he had to pull double duty there. So that was not an uncommon thing, because the tools were just very primitive at the time. So as far as the overall style of this game musically, it has very, very much a synth production, a lot of woodwinds as well. I think that's pretty fair. It's certainly not the most intense soundtrack out there of all the Pokemon games, and that kind of makes sense given that these are supposed to be, the puzzles are timed, but they're not, but it's not usually, you're not usually in too much of a rush, except for one of the tracks I picked. And does that stylistic generalization I've made, does that make at least some sense?
Yeah, I think it's pretty fair. I wrote down my notes that the entire overarching thing sort of seems to be xylophone meets softcore chiptune, sort of like in some ways it's very synthetic, and other ways it's not, but it is very sparse overall. It's kind of an interesting blend of instruments, but it's a bit a bit sparse, very repetitive, but like also extremely loopable and kind of catchy.
Yeah, I definitely didn't find any of the stuff we picked out or that was in the soundtrack gratingly loopy or minimal or anything like that. But it definitely isn't the most verbose or melodic soundtrack out there. And like I said, part of that is because you could spend a minute on a puzzle, you could spend an hour, on some of these, and sometimes you have to use the same track for both of those either way. So. But speaking of picked out tracks, as usual, each of us has picked out 3 tracks. Let's see, I picked out the title screen / credits theme, the daily training theme, and the alternative world map. Now, Anne, what did you pick out?
I picked out Stage Picross, the regular map, and where is my other one? And Medals.
Ah. All right. So we try to usually go with these in somewhat of a game order. Now there's some ordering in this game. You can restate that so my mouth is closer to the microphone. So we usually try and go in something of a game order here, although this one, there's sort of a standard progression sequence, but there's also a fair bit of freedom, so that complicates things a little bit. But definitely at the start of the game, you have the title screen, which is also used as the credits theme, which is one of my picks. So what I kind of noticed about this one, first off, at the very beginning, there's a little bit of the main Pokemon game theme in there. But really what I noticed the most about this is that it has a very uplifting or even percolating quality to it. And was that sort of, do you have similar words to describe it, or do you have a different take, or...
I just kind of thought it had a very pretty little melody, which kind of contrasted some of the other tracks that we'll talk about later. Like there was, I don't know, like it just sounded, ethereal is not the word I want to use, but like they did use a lot of higher notes than compared to some of the other tracks we'll talk about. And I just thought that was an interesting choice. If in a soundtrack that everything sounds very the same, this did have a bit of a unique little riff going on.
Yeah. I mean, it is the title screen. You don't want to be too foreboding or, deep in thought there is probably the better set of words there. I don't think this game is not supposed to be super maybe intimidating, but certainly it's supposed to be one that's supposed to make you think in a way that you don't necessarily in some others, at least not the same way in other Pokemon games. Not that they require, no thought. One thing I noticed here with some of the synth instruments, I have to relook at it to be sure, but some of the score elements in the Detective Pikachu movie are synth-based. I don't just mean the Roundhouse theme, but some of the parts around Rhyme City. And, there are little bits and pieces of this that seem not completely dissimilar. This would have come out certainly before the movie was in active development. I'm not sure what they gave Henry Jackman to work on that, if this might have been part of it since it was relatively recent, but... just kind of a thought there. I don't know. It's something I want to sort of toss out there. Any thoughts, Anne?
I mean, I wouldn't have thought there were any similarities per se, but that's cool if you noticed some.
Yeah, it's pretty loose there, but I couldn't help but feel some. I felt some similarities to other stuff, a little bit of Mystery Dungeon sometimes, and I get the feeling that they gave Yoko some other Pokemon stuff to listen to, besides just the main game theme, which you'll hear in a couple of these tracks. So I figure she might have had I'm sure she probably did some studying on other aspects of the franchise when she was asked to write music for this game. But we sort of mentioned there is a little bit of a structure, and that involves a world map of sorts that sort of strings together different puzzles in the game there. And you picked out the regular world map. Tell us a little bit about that one.
Yeah, well, this is very upbeat, very jaunty. Again, kind of has that... It feels like there are only 4 instruments. There might be more, but when I was trying to parse out the sounds for them, like I could only identify like a percussion, a bass, maybe a woodwind, and like a synth pad. There are probably more, but like it felt very sparse, and yet it kind of just had a bit of a more fuller sound nonetheless, and kind of a very exploratory vibe, like we're looking around and having an adventure.
Yeah, sort of the phrase that came up with this one was sort of like walking woodwinds. The map that it shows there seems like a neighborhood type of deal of some sort. Like it's not a super urbanized city, but it's not the middle of the country really either. So it seems like you're kind of going through town or something like that, and there are various, pseudo landmarks along the path that forks in various places and all that stuff. And I think this does a pretty good job of sort of conveying that, sort of a journey in there.
Mm-hmm.
And I guess the other thing I put down was sunny. And any other things you wanted to put out there for this track, Anne?
Yeah, no, sunny sounds actually like a really good adjective to describe this. It's just overall very positive and low stakes. Like there is no threat on this adventure. We are only going to have fun.
Pretty much. I mean, certainly this is not the most dangerous sounding game on the whole, but let's go on to my second pick. This is daily training. So, because like a lot of freemium type games, there's some sort of daily play aspect to it. In this case, there's a sort of rapid fire puzzle mode of, I think it's 7x7 grids. Your goal is to complete 5 of them in ideally under 2 minutes, and you can earn some credits that way, some extra credits that way. So if you're not paying for the game, you can earn a little bit more to do in there without having to wait as long if you're really good at that. But it has a specific music track, and of all the tracks in this game, it's certainly one of the more energetic or urgent ones, in part because, like I said, there is not a time limit, but certainly a time goal that you're trying to get to do that. I actually ended up doing, by the way, this segment for today right before today's discussion, and I actually managed to beat the par time there to earn a little extra credit, but in any case, I think it feels actually almost a little bit dancey. I don't know. Anne, what were your kind of observations here?
I wrote down funky. It has kind of a real funky groove to it. Dancey could work too, yeah. It also has just like a really prominent and strong bass section, both in like the percussion and the actual like bass instrument line. So very easy to find a beat to dance to.
Yeah, and the bass line was something that kind of jumped out to me. I did make a point to listen to some of this on headphones. It's maybe not as high fidelity or stretching the fidelity as much as something like Pokemon Battle Trose was, but it is... the bass line is kind of interesting. During what you would call the high point or climax of the tune, it does sort of match up with the lead for a little bit there, and then it sort of goes back to doing its own little, bass line thing for the rest of the piece until it, it loops indefinitely. So that really, that, and of course, obviously the purpose of this track being quite different from most of the rest of the game, jumped out to me. All right, well, Anne, let's go to your next pick. There's a couple different like variations on puzzle themes there, depending on whether you're doing a regular puzzle or a Mega Evolution puzzle. There's also something called Picross, which if I looked it up correctly, if I remember correctly, there are these large murals that you get little bitty pieces, 10 by 10 pieces that you get to do one at a time of these large murals, and I think this is the theme used there. What did you what sort of caught your attention with this particular track?
Okay, so this track has I don't know what you call this instrument, but I thought it was very interesting. This weird, like, boingy instrument that I thought was so very unique in this overall composition of, like, realistic-ish sounding woodwinds with synth pads and, like, a xylophone. That whatever this weird boingy instrument is kind of just made it unique and odd, and I loved it. I don't know how to describe it beyond that. Like a spring.
Yeah, I noticed a bit of a rattling sound in some of the percussion in there. But I actually, the phrase I came up with this one was sort of peering downward. I mean, like these are a little bit unusual in that you're doing very small parts of what ends up being a very large, spoiler alert, picture of either Primal Groudon or Primal Kyogre. Um, so you end up doing very little pieces that you earn from doing the other puzzles one at a time. So I don't know. I mean, this is probably one of the more minimal tracks in there, but it still does make a bit of a name for itself, if that makes sense.
Yeah, yeah, it does. Again, I don't know how to describe it well, or that one instrument that I love in it, but it does overall present itself as a unique track.
All right, well let's go on to my third pick. This is the alternative world map or the parallel world. I'm not sure. I forget exactly what it's called in the user interface there, but after you complete the main game, you get to basically you get a parallel map where you get to do all the same puzzles again, but with some additional rules. Basically, they make it a little more difficult by putting some numbers that cross columns or cross rows there, and your goal is to sort of figure out, that makes it a little more difficult to figure some things out. And it comes with this alternative world map. And, it's there probably are some direct musical through lines, possibly to the regular map, but really what I noticed about it is that it has a much more trepidatious or careful quality to it, because it has something of a familiar yet awe. And what sort of hits you when you listen to this?
It's kind of got a weird experimental vibe to it. And yeah, like, I don't know about trepidatious, but like definitely just a little bit unsettling. It's not as sunny and like peaceful and like this is going to just be a fun thing. There's like just a little just sense of something being unusual about it.
Yeah, so having a parallel map or parallel world is a pretty common thing in games. I'm sure it goes back probably to the early days of video games, but one of the more famous ones is, of course, 1991/92, depending on which territory you're in, Legend of Zelda: Link to the Past, which has the light world and the dark world, which was done partially because they could make the dark world using some of the geometry from the light world and so on and so forth to save space on the cartridge. But those have two very different themes where the light world is, well, it's a redo of the standard Zelda theme from the first game, and then the dark world is this much more ominous, oppressive, somewhat oppressive dark theme that sort of sells the fact that this side of the world or this version of the world is not as nice a place. This goes for a little bit of a different category where it says this might seem familiar, but it's not quite the same, is I think what they're going for here, and I think the music really captures that. And did you have was that where you were thinking in, or did you have some other ideas, or?
I think that's a pretty good summary of it. And Pokemon is a franchise that canonically has both a reverse world and the negative zone and like a bunch of unknown realities. So like if we want to headcanon this, we can do whatever we want.
Yeah, so not entirely unheard of from various Pokemon games, depending on what you want to talk about there. But yeah, and I think it's a bit more ambient as well than the regular map theme, so kind of interesting there. And you have your third track, which is the Medals screen. I think first of all, we get a little more of the Pokemon main game theme in there. But tell us what else you sort of wrote down about this one.
Well, that is why I picked it. It was the most Pokemon of all the tracks. Like it is. In addition to having like the main game thing, it also like is the most full and the most like feeling a little bit orchestral and adventurous and battle-y as if it were a main series Pokemon game. This is the one that feels the closest to that. All the other tracks are a lot of fun and I like them, but like there's nothing about them that says, oh yeah, this is obviously a Pokemon game in the way that some others do. And it's possibly because Yuka, sorry, was not originally part of the Pokemon world as entrenched in it as maybe some other composers have been, because it just doesn't feel as Pokemon. But this track was the one where it came in, it was like, hi, we're a Pokemon game, and like this is the sound Pokemon games tend to have, and it just felt a lot more similar to other soundtracks we talked about.
Yeah, and of course the medal screen is where you see your overall progress and a bunch of different game-wide challenges that you've done there. The individual stages also have little challenges for them as well, which we'll talk about in our game discussion. But this being sort of these are my accomplishments screen, I think that's also another reason why it borrows more from the main series, title theme for the games there. So it gives you probably a little more pride and accomplishment in all the things you've managed to do in this little downloadable game.
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, as far as like an overall opinion, I do want to be clear. I don't think this is a bad game at all in terms of music. However, it's obviously, some of it, because it's a deep thinking type of game sometimes, some of these puzzles can take minutes or longer to solve, depending on, what type of hints you're using or stuff like that. And as a result, this music is a little more minimal than certainly some other Pokemon games out there. But that doesn't mean it's bad, and it doesn't mean, if it were too minimal, we wouldn't have too much to talk about here. But they were definitely still worth talking about, and I think they get the job done, is basically what I put down there. Andy, you have a similar perspective, or?
Yeah, because it is so minimal, I don't think it's a game soundtrack that I would put on for the purpose of just listening to it in the way I might with some others. But it certainly, because it is more minimal and because there aren't a ton of tracks, it fits the job it was meant to do, which is to play under this puzzle game. And it certainly does an excellent job of that.
Yeah, and this being, like I said, more of a play at your own pace type of puzzle game, for the most part, is different demands than something like a Pokemon Puzzle League or Puzzle Challenge, or some of the other stuff we've seen out there, which is more active. So, yeah, it pretty much works well there. We haven't seen any sort of follow-up here, but it wouldn't be a bad style if they ever do go back to this type of game again.
Mm-hmm.
But if you had any thoughts on any of these tracks or ones we skipped, or the soundtrack overall, you can always give us a comment. We are... that can be via email, pokepress@gmail.com. You can leave a comment on one of our videos, or you can reach out to us on, it's funny, I interviewed someone recently at MMA Milwaukee, and they said, yeah, I'm never going to call it X. It's always going to be Twitter to me, but X or Twitter, at Pokepress. But with that said, I do have some feedback to go over, so let me go ahead and punch that up. All right, but yeah, I do have some feedback to go over, speaking of which. So first off, about 2 months before I recorded this, I had an opportunity to go to the annual Anime Milwaukee convention. That was a little later than it usually is this year. It was in March instead of February, so in theory at least a little bit warmer. I had a chance to conduct a written interview as well as 4 press sessions with 5 different voice actors. This is one of them, Chris Hackney, who has had kind of a smattering of roles. I don't know about any in the main series that I was able to find out about, but he's had roles in some of the games and some of the mini-series and so on and so forth. Specifically, let's see, he was in the game Detective Pikachu. He was in Pokemon Masters as Volkner, and he was in Hisuian Snow. He had a role or 2 there. The Hisuian Snow, of course, is the Legends Arceus tie-in from a couple years ago when that came out. It'll be interesting to see. I assume they're going to do something similar for Legends ZA when that comes out in 2025. But I have some comments up here. This is from Tanks6160. First of all, complimented me on the interview, which I always appreciate. So let's see. This individual was actually excited when they first got announced, when Chris first got announced to work on some Pokemon stuff, and was even more excited. I assume this individual follows some of his other work as well. And when he got announced for other things like Hisuian Snow. I know, Anne, I assume you've had a chance to watch this interview. Did you have any thoughts on it more generally?
Like in general, like he's just such a like he just seems to be very positive about his experience with Pokemon, which is always great to hear. And yeah, like I'm glad he's gotten lots of different little roles, and yeah, like, he has a good voice for this type of work.
Yeah, he also talks about some of his other work, like in various other games and other anime. So it's always interesting getting a little cross section there. And Tank 6160, we also appreciate your feedback as well. I got another comment on same video. Let's see. Unripe the Berry 6283 appears to be the screen name here. Sorry about stumbling on that a bit. But was very thankful for the interview and gave Chris some compliments on his body of work. So, definitely want to toss some of that in there. All right, next up we have a couple comments on my Why It Works series of videos. Remember what these are. You've probably heard a bunch of them even if you've never seen my YouTube channel, because I use them as sort of spacers in the podcast episodes after every major segment or every 20 minutes or whatever like that, just to space things out and give you a little bit of a breather. Our first one is Why It Works, Flying Without Wings. So this is talking about this repurposed song, which is usually what happens with the Why It Works series. This is Dwayne Simmons 3447, who's I believe commented on other stuff as well, mentioning how the dub really got a hit song. For those not aware, Flying Without Wings in '99 was a big hit in various parts of Europe, but the first American big showing it got was in the second Pokemon movie credits and on the album there, so they were pretty lucky. I'm not sure why it was never pushed as like a straight-up single here in America. The label wasn't interested, or distributor, or something like that. As far as why it's in the movie, that may have been a deal with Steve Mack, the co-writer of Flying Without Wings. Oh, and blah, blah, blah. Oh, and Celestial from Scarlet and Violet. So he boomeranged back around a few years ago for that. But it was kind of interesting. Like I said, the one name you don't see on the Pokemon 2000 is the person who actually got Westlife the song. Simon Cowell is not listed, as far as I could tell, anywhere in the special thanks or anything like that, so I don't know that he had anything to do with it. I don't know. It's just kind of an interesting little piece of trivia, especially when the song would get, make it a big splash a few years later with the Ruben Studdard version. So, I mean, we've talked about the song numerous times, like in our Disputed Pokemon Songs episode. And I don't know, did you have anything in particular to add to this particular juncture, I guess?
I don't know that there's much more to say that we haven't said on previous episodes, but I agree with Mr. Dwayne Simmons here. If they just got a good song, like that entire soundtrack. There was a point in my life where it was the soundtrack to my life, and I would fall asleep listening to the Pokemon 2000 soundtrack and listening to Flying Without Wings, and yeah, it's just a good song. It just fit the mood.
Yeah, it wasn't as commercially successful as the first movie soundtrack by quite a bit, but I think a lot of folks coming back to it, later says, I really wish I had paid more attention to some of the downtrack stuff on this. I also see a fair number of things on Twitter/X actually saying, oh, wow, yeah, you're right, there was a Weird Al song in this one, when they go through the credits of the second movie, and they're reminded of that. All right, speaking of Pokemon 2000, Why It Works, The Chosen One. So this is a little different.
Oh my gosh, I love this song.
Yeah. So this is, normally we talk about repurposed or reworked songs for the Why It Works. This one was written for the movie. It's based on the legend, disturb, not the harmony, fire, ice, or lightning, lest these titans, so on and so forth. And basically they gave the B-52s a job where they took the legend from the movie and worked it into an actual song. I don't remember if they did all the, obviously the lyrics are from the legend from the movie. I forget who exactly did the, arrangement and stuff like that, but obviously the B-52s performed it. And this one is more so about, how it sort of fits in with their other work and why they were such a good choice for this song. Having, I get the feeling that one of the things that made them do it, let's see, Cindy Wilson, one of the members of the band, has a couple kids who I think were born in the late 80s or early 90s, and I'm guessing they were sort of the vector for convincing them to do this. Although they had done other stuff, they showed up in the Flintstones, one of the Flintstones movies, the BC-52s, and they had done, I think, one or two other things. But certainly, having the B-52s do a, legend for an island and stuff like that, like this, if that were in another movie, I think it would have worked about as well to have them do a song about that. Anyway, the comments we have on this one, Nathan Cruz 9172 says, I love Pokemon Movie 2000. It has a time mark of 31 seconds. I don't remember exactly what's at that time point. And then we have I4271. Album was already great, but this song was a true pearl. Excuse me. So, yeah, this, along with, I think, The Power of One and Pokemon, B-52s, Donna Summer, Weird Al Yankovic, three artists that are very recognizable by their voice when you ever listen to them. So I think getting them for this album, even if it wasn't as successful as the first movie soundtrack for various reasons, was a great choice. And this is a great little song. I've suggested, though, in this why it works is if they ever did do a CGI remake, which doesn't seem like it's on the horizon for Pokemon 2000, that adding a scene with like virtual members of the band playing this song would be a good way to work it in there at the Island Festival or something like that as a cutaway or something. And I don't know if we've talked about this one that much. It's really not as much as Flying Without Wings because it doesn't have much a life aside from this movie, kind of, unfortunately. But what are your kind of? Let me say it again, so I'm close to the microphone again. Sorry about that. And I know we haven't really talked about this one as much, certainly not as much as Flying Without Wings, because it doesn't have as much of a life outside this movie. But it sounds like you have a definite appreciation for it. Did you want to get some words in here?
I do have an appreciation for it. It's just such a oddball little song, but that's why I love it. Like, sometimes it's kind of a song that, like, on the one hand takes itself seriously, but, like, also doesn't. It's like that. It's almost like the epitome of the crack treated seriously trope. And I love it. It's like got a good range of vocals, like high vocals and like low vocals and dramatics and like just enough camp to make you laugh, but like not enough that the song isn't impactful. It's just, it walks a very thin line, and I love it for its weirdness. Its musical like acrobatics that it's pulling off. It's great. I love it.
Yeah, I suppose in universe, had the B-52s been doing if there was a music festival on Samudi Island and they decided to write a song about it, this might be what you got out of it. But I think they would probably jump at the chance to sort of adapt something like the island legend and the story of the bird trio and Lugia and stuff like that. So that was kind of a fun one there. And thank you very much for both of your comments on that.
Well, maybe at the Shamoody Island Festival post Ash Ketchum visiting the island, maybe this is a song they perform every year to
you never
commemorate.
Know. All right. And speaking of Twitter, or X, this was a thread from about a month before we recorded this. This was back in April of 2024. And this is from Resting Dad Face. Now, he went to an event that's held every spring called Record Store Day. There's really two. There's the Spring Record Store Day, and then there's the Black Friday Record Store Day after Thanksgiving. And so he was kind of mentioning that, Record Store Day and Pokemon Go Community Day happened to be on the same day that back in April. And living his best life, he said, as a music and game nerd. So I kind of decided to jump in. I didn't pick up anything for Record Store Day this year because there wasn't too much that interested me. But I asked, since he seemed to be interested in both vinyl records and Pokemon, I've sort of thought about the idea of having a Pokemon product on Record Store Day, or getting more Pokemon stuff on vinyl. The last thing they did that I know of, I think there might have been some stuff in Japan, but as far as the West, Pokemon 25, the album, has a vinyl version, which is around here somewhere. I may have filed it off already a ways back, so I don't have it to pull up for the folks watching this at home. And before that, there was a thing where they did The Scorch of Detective Pikachu. The movie was put on vinyl, which I happen to have. And sort of the gist of what I come up with here is that there's probably a couple of things that would work, but at the same time, speaking of art, last year there was the Van Gogh event that went little off the rails at that museum there, and it was kind of nobody lost an ear, but thing at the museum in the Netherlands or whatever it was, and that was kind of a blemish on the Pokemon brand a little bit. And I wouldn't want that to happen here. And my kind of fear is actually for certain things, like say putting To Be a Master on vinyl or the first movie pop soundtrack on vinyl. The demand for those might be so much that those get very easily scalped at the quantities, which can go into the thousands for record store day. I forget what if it gets into the 5 figures, which might be what you kind of need to do. But Anne, sorry, that was a mess of words there. What are your kind of thoughts on all of this?
Well, my first thought is it's entirely possible that Celestial by Ed Sheeran charted well in the UK simply because the man is British, and UK might genuinely like their own artist. But I do think like there's definitely a fear of what you're saying, but it's kind of like I don't see the point of stressing about it when
it's not my decision.
Right, exactly. Like there are people who do market research and could learn from the Van Gogh event who are probably already having this conversation with swarths more data than you and I have. So I'm kind of like, I'm not worried about it at all. Like maybe not. The people who know will know like more than I do. But it would be nice to have Pokemon music on vinyl for sure. Like for the people who like vinyls. And definitely Resting Dad Face. Anytime you can get a Willie Nelson or the Cranberries, like that, you did well, sir. Like those are the correct decisions. So,
yeah, I don't know. Like obviously, as evidenced by the Van Gogh stuff and certain other things, sometimes Pokemon does do like a swing and the miss on estimating demand or whatever like that. So hopefully they learned a little bit. But I know they don't. So like Pokemon 25. It sold kind of okay. You can still find copies of a lot of the stuff online and stuff like that, especially on eBay. Going back to what you said about Ed Sheeran, so I had mentioned in this tweet, and apologies to the folks who are listening to this and not following along live, but I mentioned that Celestial charted much higher in the UK, and I think I mentioned this thread. I think part of that is because that was sold physically in the UK. I think Ed autographed like 1,000 copies, and those were snapped up, and some of them by people who wanted it, some by people who were selling on eBay, and that may be one reason why that. Of course, obviously, yes, him being from his native country there might also have affected that, but it charted like it'll be on Muzak services in the UK indefinitely for a long time there. Versus here in America, I think I don't even know if it made it into the top 40. It did okay, but when you consider like "Don't Say You Love Me" was about 21 on the Billboard charts back in '99 or early 2000, whichever it was, when it peaked on the chart, and "Power of One" was a top hit on the dance chart. It's people like seeing cultural proof, is I guess what we're getting into here. It's like it's not enough that the song is just good to you. It's like nice to have it, validated through, how well the song does on the charts, or when that's a possibility, or, how well the Detective Pikachu movie grossed that weekend overall, or whatever it happens to be. But yeah, so a lot of considerations there if they decide to go this route. I mean, this is the 25th anniversary year of Pokemon the first movie, but also the To Be a Master soundtrack, and the obviously the first movie soundtrack, both of which I think would be good candidates done correctly. To go onto a vinyl pressing. I'd also like the first movie soundtrack to be available on digital services, which you can get about half if you know where to look. But that's a discussion for another day.
Certainly my Spotify playlists could be a lot more rounded out by certain Pokemon songs. I'm just saying.
Yeah. So like I said, if you have comments, please give those to us. Email pokepress@gmail.com. At Pokecross on Twitter or X if you want to be official on that one. Or you can always leave a comment on one of our videos. We always appreciate that, and we will try to work those into a future discussion. But as far as the next Pokemon side game to be discussed, that is going to be Pokken Tournament. And I put in parentheses on the slide here, DX. As you may recall, this started out in, I think, 2015 as an arcade game. which I did get to play a little bit of on a couple occasions. And then it came to the Wii U in early 2016. And then it got about a year and a half later, in 2017, it got a port with additional content from, I guess, an updated version of the arcade game. It got that got put onto the Switch, which presumably includes some new stages and new music, I would assume. So we'll have a fair bit to talk about there. I played a very small amount of this game here and there, so I'll have to reacquaint myself with it. And I don't know what your experience level with Pokken Tournament is.
I have played it a fair amount at conventions and the like. I've never owned it, so I am debating whether or not I want to purchase it or not. It's kind of been always on the list of the wish list, but like, do I love it enough to buy it? Sort of situation. Like, this might be what puts me over the edges.
Yeah, this was a competitive circuit for a number of years, up through about 2022. It probably would have only gone through, well, if it weren't for the pandemic, it probably would have gone through only 2020, but they honored their commitment when Worlds was pushed back 2 years. So we'll kind of talk about, the music of it, but we'll also do our usual game discussion. We'll talk about why this game did okay but not great, and why maybe the Switch version didn't take off as much as they would have liked. But that'll be our next game discussion. Until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you for having me.
This has been Stephen Reich. All right, folks, thanks. Okay, so we are going to do a game discussion on Pokemon Picross. But first off, I want to get some water.
I need to readjust my glasses. Oh my gosh.
But thank you very much. We'll be back in just a moment here, so give us just a moment.
How is everyone doing out there in internet land? Hope it is good night. Let me see the comments sections. We got at least a watcher or two out there. Hello. Is it nighttime for you as well, or is it? Are you daring to watch us in the wee hours in the morning, or I don't know. I don't know what time zones people have right now. But I hope it's a good day for you. I'm not good at vamping. I've been rewatching Eurovision a lot because I'm still not over. It was a good competition. A lot of interesting things going down, positive and negative, in that competition. I'm still upset that we didn't crown the witch, but
All right, appreciate folks' patience there while we take a quick break. But yeah, we always do these games discussions afterwards. Try to get some words in there. So I'll do a quick little introduction. 1 second, as soon as I can punch up my notes again. I think I need to replace. I'm one of those crazy people who loves using. I have a ThinkPad, and I love using the little eraser head that they put in the middle there as the mouse instead of the actual touchpad. I am one of those folks who I guess keeps those, but I need to replace the one I have because I think it's wearing out. Okay. All right, well, we talked about the music. Let's talk about Pokemon Picross as a game. Now, first off, I assume that if you picked this episode, you already have some idea of how Picross or nonograms work. But just to remind folks, the way it works is you have a grid of a certain. Usually they're square, but not always in this game. Sometimes they're 20 by 15, but they're usually they're a rectangle of some sort. And then each edge will have a series of numbers that'll say, like, basically how many runs of filled-in squares there are in sequence there. So it might say like 1, 2, 1. That means there's a group of one dot by itself, at least one space, and then two more dots in a row, and then at least one space, and then a 1. You have those for on the rows and on the columns, and your goal, of course, is to figure out what the image actually looks like. And if you can do that, then then you use that to fill in the picture. So as Anne mentioned in our music discussion, she does not like these games. Doesn't enjoy playing them despite doing a number of other types of puzzles. But if you know the basics there, that is a pretty good description of how Pokemon Picross works. You have the choice, since this is a 3DS game, of either using the D-pad and buttons, or you can use the stylus. I think some things require the stylus. Stylus is generally faster, I think. To fill in the squares, you can also mark squares with an X if you know, okay, this is definitely not a space there, and you sort of deduce your way through it. This game does all that stuff, but it also has Pokemon Assist. So over the course of the game, you sort of build up a collection of Pokemon by solving puzzles, and you can sort of use those by putting them in various slots. And they all have different skills. They're based on their type. So some of the ones will reveal squares, some will. There's a thing called Blue Force, which will show you, highlight which rows you can start filling in, which have enough information to start filling in there. You can also have ones that slow down or stop time. All sorts of things there based on the types. Now, Anne, I assume, even though you didn't really play this, you did take a look at some of that. What did you think? Thematically, I mean, I didn't feel like there was a huge correlation between the type and, what it did there. They sort of boxed various ones in there. So I don't know, they did split them, but I'm not sure that the types really have a tie in me. Does that kind of make sense what I'm saying there?
Yeah, it's not like a water type has an ability that you associate with water, just given the nature of the game. I did like that aspect of it, though, that the Pokemon, different Pokemon could have different abilities. But yeah, I agree. It's a little rough to kind of correlate that a little bit to their in-game, their main franchise in-game types, I guess.
Yeah, so it is. I'm sure that was some sort of mandate they had there to try and work in some Pokemon mechanics, even though, unlike, say, in Shuffle or some of the other games where type mechanics, when Pokemon go directly at each other, they have, weaknesses and strengths like that. This one, Fire does what's called cross reveal, and I guess maybe, although, the actual, Fire Blast attack is 5-sided because it's an Oki or big symbol there. When that's moving down the field. So
Right.
rather than a cross. So I'm not sure they got it great that way. But I mean, I'm not going to turn down that help unless.
Right.
So every puzzle has a set of goals or accomplishments or whatever. One of them is usually time based. One of them says how many or which Pokemon you can set usually. One says how many times, some of them say how many times you can use skills or which skills you can use, so on and so forth. And then there's always a fourth one, which is complete all goals at the same time, which not my favorite on there. First of all, if you've just solved the puzzle, there's very little incentive to go back in there and just change your Pokemon loadout so you can solve it again to get the exact same puzzle. That's one nice thing about having the alternate world at the end is that, okay, you don't really remember all the puzzles there. They're still a little fuzzy in your head. Whereas if you did the alternate puzzle right after doing the regular one, that would be pretty pointless.
Yeah.
But the level goals, one reason you want to do those is you get some extra, if you're haven't bought into the whole game yet, you get some extra credits that you can use to fill in some more squares, because that's basically what the clock handles. As the clock rewinds back, you can fill in more squares until you have enough to fill in the entire puzzle. The game will warn you if you try to go into a puzzle and you don't have enough credits built up to actually fill it in. As far as collectibles, there are some of them. First of all, we mentioned with the Picross, those are little tiles that you get from doing various puzzles in the game that build up to a major tapestry. And they've done similar mechanics in some of their other Troze games on the Switch, where you gain pieces of a larger puzzle that you can work on by doing the regular puzzles. I don't know, Anne, let's actually rewind a bit. Talking about those level goals, I know you aren't a fan of the underlying game structure itself, but what do you think about those level goals there? Where are their pluses and minuses?
I mean, I definitely. It's hard to say because, as you say, if you didn't make all the level goals, why would you do this type of puzzle again? So I would, if we were in a game development meeting, that would be a thing I'd bring up. It's should the level goals be for a group of puzzles or something? To me, it seems silly. I like the general idea of the level goals, but like this is not a type of replayable level. So that
yeah, like I said, it's not when you're going to go straight back into the same puzzles just so you can get the other thing, because you get, like I said, you get those extra block credits, but you're just going to use up that many. So like if you got like all the using the right Pokemon and the right skills, but you didn't do it in the amount of time they said, you know, like I said, because there's always that one that says do all of these goals together to get this one, and so I don't know, it just feels not the greatest. I'm glad there are goals. I just think they could be done better, although I couldn't tell you off the top of my head exactly how to restructure them.
Yeah, like this is an idea that I think has promise. It's just we probably needed to go back and like do a second draft on how we're like, rethink on how we're doing it.
But the other thing you get for doing puzzles, there's a lot of, like, I guess, collectibles of various sorts. Like, sort of the main one is that certain puzzles have tiles associated or mural tiles associated with them, which help you build up these, again, spoiler alert, these large Picross puzzles of, Primal Groudon and Primal Kyogre that you do in little 10 by 10 chunks as you get these mural tiles. And that's the Micross stages there, where you do them little bit by bit. So there is a little bit of that. I'm not sure. I'm trying to think what else they could have done there. They do something similar in some of the other Picross ones, where you have a Mega Picross that you build up with pieces that you earn from doing other puzzles. I don't know. And any sort of thoughts on that? Having a secondary structure there? I assume it helps break up the gameplay, but again, since you're not really enthralled by this anyway. Not to say your opinion is completely invalid, but
yeah, no, I do like the idea of like you win the puzzle and you win a few pieces for this larger puzzle. Like that is a cool idea. Again, I think there are ways we could make it better if we sat in the meeting with them, but like I do think that basic idea is something that's cool, and like I've seen it in a lot of other games, and like I remember karaoke machines, certain karaoke houses, like depending on how good your score was, you like revealed pixels in a puzzle kind of a thing. And so you were inclined to like sing more songs better to reveal the whole picture or whatever. So like, yeah, it's a fun little mechanic to kind of just add some extra value to the game.
Yeah, and then I guess, well, obviously Anne's answer to this was no, but we sort of talked about the freemium model and whether this was worth paying for. I did play it free for a while and decided, okay, I want to unlock all this and get through as much as I can, so I paid the amount to unlock everything else, which is, it puts me in a little bit of a, not a completely weird state, but I can still like earn the Picrats that are used to fill in the blocks, but I don't consume any of them, which is kind of odd because I paid partway through for the remainder of what I needed to basically unlock the rest of the game. Although I suppose, like I said, if you've got it partially completed and not paid for, well, you're going to be waiting a while if you want to work on it now. But but in any case, yeah, I felt this was actually a pretty good value. And had they just gotten rid of the freemium mechanic and just said pay $10 or whatever it was for this, it certainly seems like it was worth it to me. Like I said, I'm not sure if they presented it that way, if I would have reacted the same way or what. But yeah, I mean, to give some comparison, I've spent absolutely nothing on Pokemon Shuffle, despite the fact that I do like that game a fair bit. I have spent money in Pokemon Go, mostly on events within the game, as well as a few real-world events I've attended. Let's see. I'm trying to think what the other...
I have a question.
Sure, go ahead.
When this game released, were we as a culture as used to freemium as we are now? Because I know I wasn't. To me, the idea of like a free game with in-game purchases is like a rather new thing for me personally, just because I'm always late to every technology train and smartphone update, et cetera, et cetera. But this is what, 2015? Like in that time, do you think as a more tech savvy person that the culture as a whole was more into this pay to play freemium area?
I mean, it existed before. It sort of got a big boost with smartphone gaming since they had transactions built into the App Store, and eventually they figured out how to do in-app purchases and stuff, and that's where a lot of this freemium, or Nintendo, I think, uses the term free to start, which I think is a little more honest in terms of naming. Or maybe, I don't know if they have a different name in Japan or whatever it is for these types of games. But they were a thing there. To be honest, I generally try and avoid a lot of stuff there. Like another, obviously, freemium type game or free to start game, Pokemon Masters, which we'll be talking about probably next year, I want to say. If at the rate we're going through these, I haven't spent a dime on that one. If they put out an actual soundtrack, I would pick that up and pay money for it, no problem. But as far as the game itself, I haven't felt compelled with that one. That's sort of the balancing act with if you only play it a little bit each day and the in-game credits do enough for you to do that, it's
Mm-hmm. So do you think there would have been a difference if it released 10, well, not 10, but 5 years, 6 years, 7 years later than it did? Or do you think our collective acceptance of the freemium model was already kind of where it is now?
It depends on who you are. Like I said, I don't know that I've totally accepted. I get that, developers got to pay the bills. And this, in some games, I think can be structured in such a way that this makes sense. And some others, maybe not. I'm glad there are still folks out there making, single purchase, maybe with some DLC, but there's a big purchase, stuff like that to get through, that gets you most of the game, the main game content and so on and so forth. I don't know. I mean, how we pay for games is obviously an evolving concept that, and especially with Nintendo now being the final console maker, basically just charged for online play and so on and so forth. So, I don't know. That's kind of an open question, I guess. But as far as freemium, I think that was fairly well established by the mid-2010s and already had some of the pushback with, people talk about loot boxes and whatnot like that, which this isn't so much that, certainly, but you get the idea. Any other thoughts or questions you had about the gameplay in this, Anne?
No, yeah, just because my perspective on it is just, I don't like these specific types of puzzles. And then of most puzzles that I like to do, just how my brain's wired, I like to do them with my hands and a pencil that I hold in my hands. So, the added idea of trying to do it with a game controller, to me, there's just a crossed wire. So it's I am not the market of this, but I am curious if this were released as a smartphone game, just last year, would the reception of most people be different than it was at the time? That's a curious discussion to me, but again, because this is just so obviously not my game, I don't know that I have much to add to the conversation.
Yeah, and not sure I have a great answer to that either. I mean, first of all, I should note that this game was only released on 3DS, unlike Pokemon Shuffle, which got a mobile release, or Pokemon Unite, which got a Switch and mobile release, as did Pokemon Cafe Remix, I believe has a mobile version. Maybe it does, maybe it doesn't. I can't remember off the top of my head. I've only ever played the Switch version. But I know Unite has a mobile version, as do some of the other things. So, in this particular case, I don't know exactly what to say there. So, I don't know. I think we'll just have to see where the things go from here. All right. I think that's a good stopping point. Thank you to everyone who came in for this, especially who put up with those AI-generated songs. I may split that out. I'm going to do something with that part, I can tell you that much.
I mean, that was actually a really fun game.
Yeah, and if you want to do your end of that with Udio or Suno or whatever 11 Labs is coming out with and try to quiz me on that sometime.
Okay. Do either of those cost money to download?
They usually give you a number of free credits per day.
Okay.
So if I were using these on a more regular basis, I would almost certainly sign up, or if I were using them in a professional capacity, I would almost certainly sign up for one of those plans there.
But if I'm just using them to create a quiz for the beginning of one,
that's probably fine, since neither of us are in the business here. So,
well, I technically am, but I'm not.
Okay.
I wouldn't be using it for that. So,
Yeah, well, look up the terms of service and decide what you can or can't do with it, I guess, is the
Well, I
best. I'm
mean,
not a lawyer.
I would only use it for this.
But I
um,
think it's an interesting thing, and
yeah,
I think
it
we'll
is
be
definitely a fun game for
that one
like.
has. I think it has more legs than some of the other stuff I've done, like transforming Pokemon Masters screenshots into Detective Pikachu style movie screenshots and guessing who the character is. Um, Although that was fun, and I may try, any of those 5 songs that you think I should extend into a full thing. There, I mean, it's hard to say from 30 seconds or so.
I mean, what would you be using them for?
I don't
Like just
know. I'm
for
just
fun?
creative purposes, I guess. Like
I
the
mean,
game show one, I
then,
probably wouldn't because that was kind of 30 seconds is about how long
right?
it's
Yeah,
supposed to be a theme song for a game show, which rarely goes over a minute.
yeah. Well, if it's for your own creative purposes, then like do pick the ones that you like. like they all have potential. Like if you want to expand upon them, find the one that speaks to you.
All right.
It's
Well, I think you'll be seeing more of that in the future just because there's a lot of possibilities. There's a lot of characters out there who haven't gotten character songs and so on and so forth. So I had a fair number of things. I didn't, one I might do in the future. So this is a little hint. I didn't, I realized probably wasn't a good idea to try to get it to do a duet. So I wasn't going to try and do Tate and Liza, but that may have to wait for another day. But, um, so, but yeah, all right. Well, thank you very much, everyone who came in here.
Thank you.